When I stumbled across the job listing, it didn't seem like anything special. A simple ad tucked away on an obscure classifieds page. Warehouse job in the Arctic Circle. High pay. Room and board included. Immediate start. It sounded too good to be true, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Within days, I was on a rickety plane flying over endless white tundra. Below, the Arctic stretched endlessly, a frozen wasteland where the sun barely grazed the horizon. When the plane landed on a makeshift airstrip, a lone figure stood waiting in the biting cold. He was tall and wiry, his face weathered like old leather. "I'm Marcus," he said gruffly, shaking my hand. "Welcome to the edge of the world. Let's get you inside before you turn into an icicle." The warehouse rose out of the ice like a steel monolith, its metallic walls shimmering in the pale light. It was massive, larger than any warehouse I'd ever seen, with walls that felt unnaturally thick. Inside, the air was colder than outside, an unforgiving chill that seeped through my clothes despite the thermal gear Marcus handed me. "Cold enough for you?" he asked with a smirk. The work itself seemed straightforward, unloading shipments, tracking inventory, and moving crates with forklifts. But it didn't take long to notice that something about this place felt wrong. That night, Marcus gathered the workers in the break room for a briefing. There were about a dozen of us, bundled in layers of clothing, our faces weary and pale. "All right," Marcus began, looking at me directly. "There's one rule here, and you better listen close. If you hear the bells, stop whatever you're doing and get to the nearest locked room. Do not open the door for anyone until the bells stop. No exceptions." The group chuckled uneasily, but there was no humor in their eyes. Steve, a burly man with a thick beard, leaned over to me and whispered, "You'll think it's a joke until you hear them." I forced a laugh, unsure if they were hazing me or if there was something they weren't telling me. The Arctic days and nights blurred together under the warehouse's dim, artificial lights. Most of the workers kept to themselves, and conversations never strayed far from the mundane. Steve was the only one who seemed willing to talk. One evening, as we stacked crates, he leaned against the forklift and said, "You ever wonder why this place exists? A massive warehouse in the middle of nowhere." I shrugged. "Doesn't it store supplies for research stations or something?" He gave me a long, hard look. "That's what they tell us. But I've been here long enough to know better. There's stuff in this place, stuff that shouldn't be here. You'll see." "See what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. "Just don't mess with the crates marked with a red X. And pray you never hear the bells." It happened on my 6th night. I was organizing crates in one of the back aisles when I heard it, a soft, melodic chime echoing through the warehouse. At first, I thought it was part of the intercom system, but the sound grew louder, resonating in an eerie, hypnotic pattern. "The bells!" someone shouted in the distance. Panic erupted. Workers dropped everything and sprinted toward the secured rooms. Steve appeared out of nowhere, grabbing my arm and dragging me toward the break room. "Move!" he barked. "We don't have much time." The heavy steel door slammed shut behind us, and someone bolted it. Inside, the tension was palpable. Everyone sat in silence, their eyes wide with fear. The bells continued, their haunting melody weaving through the air like a living thing. Then came the whispers. At first, they were faint, almost like static, but soon they grew louder, more distinct. Dozens of overlapping voices filled the room, speaking in a language I couldn't understand. They weren't just in the air. They were in my head, probing my thoughts, pressing against my mind like icy tendrils. "Cover your ears," Steve hissed. "Don't listen to them." I clamped my hands over my ears and shut my eyes, trying to block out the noise. But even then, I could feel the whispers clawing at my sanity, pulling at my deepest fears. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the bells faded. The whispers stopped. An oppressive silence settled over the room. "What was that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. No one answered. They just stared at the floor, avoiding my gaze. The next day, it was as if nothing had happened. The workers returned to their tasks without a word about the bells. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, lurking just beyond my vision. Strange things began to happen. I saw shadows flicker in the corners of the warehouse, only to disappear when I turned my head. Crates seemed to move on their own, their positions shifting slightly between shifts. And always, there was the unshakable sensation of being watched. One night, I couldn't sleep. Restless, I wandered through the aisles, hoping the cold air would clear my mind. That's when I saw it. A crate marked with a red X, sitting in the middle of the aisle. Its lid was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness inside. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped closer. As I reached out to touch it, a voice behind me whispered, "Don't." I spun around, but the aisle was empty. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me. When I turned back, the crate was gone. The following day, I confronted Marcus. "What's going on here?" I demanded. "What are the bells? What's in the crates?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're better off not knowing. Just follow the rules, and you'll be fine." Unsatisfied, I decided to dig deeper. Late that night, I found an old leather journal hidden in a storage closet. Its pages were filled with cramped, handwritten notes detailing strange occurrences in the warehouse. One passage stood out. "The bells are a warning. When they ring, it means it's awake. Lock yourself away and pray it doesn't find you. But even behind locked doors, you're never truly safe." It can. The rest of the page was smudged, as if the writer hadn't finished before something terrible happened. That night, as I lay in my bunk, I thought I heard it again, the faint, melodic chime of the bells echoing through the icy void. The bells haunted my thoughts long after they faded. Even in the silence, I could feel their melody lingering, scratching at the edges of my sanity. The journal's cryptic warning replayed in my mind over and over. Lock yourself away and pray it doesn't find you. But what was it? And why were those crates marked with a red X? I couldn't get the crate I'd seen out of my head, the one that had vanished when I looked away. Something about it gnawed at me, a feeling of unfinished business, like I'd been inches from discovering something important. My curiosity grew, dangerous and insatiable. 2 nights later, I found myself back in the warehouse long after the others had gone to bed. I told myself I was just clearing my head, but deep down, I knew what I was doing. I wanted to find another red X crate. The air felt colder than usual, each breath visible in the dim light. My footsteps echoed unnaturally, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. As I wandered deeper into the aisles, I noticed a section I hadn't seen before. The rows of shelves were taller here, almost impossibly so, their tops disappearing into the shadows above. A large sign hung over the entrance, restricted access. No entry without authorization. I hesitated, my pulse quickening. If Marcus found out I'd been snooping here, I'd be fired, or worse. But something about the journal's warnings urged me forward. This was where the answers were, I was sure of it. As I stepped into the restricted area, the temperature plummeted. My flashlight struggled to penetrate the oppressive darkness, its beam flickering like a candle in the wind. The shelves here were different, older, covered in frost. The crates were stacked haphazardly, as though whoever placed them here had been in a hurry to leave. Some were unmarked, while others bore strange symbols I didn't recognize. And then I saw it, another crate with a red X. It sat alone at the end of the aisle, its lid slightly ajar. My breath caught in my throat as I approached. The air around it felt wrong, heavy and electric, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. I reached out, my hand trembling. Just as my fingers brushed the edge of the lid, a low hum filled the air, vibrating deep in my chest. "Stop!" The voice was soft but commanding, cutting through the hum like a knife. I spun around, my heart pounding. Marcus stood at the entrance to the aisle, his face pale and furious. "What the hell are you doing here?" he barked, striding toward me. I stammered, unsure how to explain myself. He grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the crate. "You have no idea what you're messing with. This isn't a game." Marcus dragged me back to the break room and slammed the door shut behind us. He paced back and forth, his expression a mix of anger and fear. "You should have stayed out of that section," he said finally. Do you even know what those crates are? No, I admitted. But I need to know. What's going on in this place? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Those crates, they're not supposed to be here. They were sent to us for containment, but no one told us what was inside. All we know is that they're dangerous. People who mess with them, they don't last long. What do you mean? Things happen, he said vaguely. Shadows that don't belong. Voices that get inside your head. And the bells. When the bells ring, it means something's waking up. I shivered, remembering the whispers that had clawed at my mind during the bells. Waking up? What is it? He didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in closer, his voice low. There's a room in the restricted section. A room no one's allowed to enter. If you want answers, that's where you'll find them. But be warned, some things are better left buried. I couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's words. The forbidden room was all I could think about. What was behind that door? What was the warehouse hiding? The next night I made my move. The restricted section was even colder than before. The air heavy with an unexplainable weight. My flashlight flickered as I navigated the aisles, my breath fogging with every step. Finally, I found it, a massive steel door at the end of the corridor. It was unmarked, save for a faint engraving above the keypad. Authorized personnel only. My heart pounded as I examined the keypad. The journal had mentioned the door, but it hadn't included a code. I tried a few guesses, birthdays, warehouse IDs, but the keypad rejected them all with a harsh beep. Then I remembered something Marcus had said in passing. The bosses always use the same code for everything. Lazy bastards. I punched in 1234. The keypad beeped, and the door clicked open. Cold air rushed out, colder than anything I'd felt before. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in near total darkness. But the room wasn't entirely dark. A faint red glow emanated from within, pulsing like a heartbeat. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on the frosty floor. The glow came from the walls themselves, which were lined with rows of red X crates. Unlike the ones I'd seen before, these crates were larger, their markings glowing faintly. A low hum filled the air, resonating in my chest. As I moved deeper into the room, the hum grew louder, almost deafening. And then I saw it. One of the crates was open. Inside the crate was something alive. Its form shifted like smoke, its edges dissolving into the air. Eyes. Too many eyes glimmered within the darkness, staring at me with an intensity that froze me in place. The hum transformed into whispers, louder and more insistent than before. They weren't just in the air. They were inside my head, clawing at my thoughts. "Free us," the whispers demanded. I stumbled back, my mind spinning. The shadows around the crate began to stretch, reaching toward me with tendrils of darkness. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused to move. "Free us," the voices repeated, more insistent now. I finally snapped out of my paralysis and bolted for the door. The whispers followed me, echoing through the corridors as I fled. When I finally reached the workers' quarters, I collapsed onto my bunk, gasping for air. But even as I tried to calm myself, the whispers lingered in my mind, their demand seared into my thoughts. "Free us." I couldn't sleep after that night. Even when I closed my eyes, the whispers followed me, scratching at the edges of my mind. "Free us." The words were relentless, echoing like a cruel chant that refused to be silenced. The others noticed the change in me. Steve stopped joking around, his usual humor replaced by concerned glances. Even Marcus seemed more guarded, his eyes narrowing whenever I entered the room. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had to go back. Something in that forbidden room had seen me, had called to me, and deep down I knew I wasn't done with it. The bells rang again 2 nights later. I was closer to the restricted section this time, organizing supplies in one of the cold storage rooms. The first chime sent a chill down my spine, but it wasn't the cold that made me shudder. This time, the sound wasn't melodic. It was distorted, like a recording played backward. The haunting notes twisted unnaturally, each one vibrating in my chest. The workers' shouts echoed through the warehouse as they scrambled for safety. I ran too, but the whispers started sooner this time, louder and more aggressive. "Why do you run?" The voice wasn't in my head anymore. It was all around me, as if the walls themselves were speaking. The aisle stretched endlessly in all directions, the crates blurring together into an incomprehensible maze. The door to the break room loomed ahead, its heavy steel frame promising safety. But just as I reached for the handle, the whispers shifted. Turn around. Against my better judgment, I did. At the end of the corridor stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly thin, its outline shifting like a mirage. Its eyes glowed faintly, piercing through the shadows with an otherworldly intensity. It didn't move. It didn't have to. Its presence alone was enough to root me to the spot. "Free us," it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The words felt heavier this time, as though they carried an unspoken threat. I backed away slowly, my hand fumbling for the door handle. The figure tilted its head, watching me with an unnatural stillness. The moment I slammed the door shut, the whisper stopped. The bells faded into silence, leaving only my ragged breathing and the hammering of my heart. Steve grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me roughly. "What did you see?" he demanded. "There was something," I stammered. "At the end of the aisle." It spoke to me. Steve's face turned pale. "You've been marked," he muttered. "What does that mean?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. "It means they've seen you, and they don't let go." The next morning, I woke to find a strange mark on my arm. It was faint, almost like a bruise, but its shape was too deliberate to be accidental. A jagged symbol that looked like an ancient rune. Steve's words echoed in my mind. "They've seen you." I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the day felt different. The air in the warehouse was heavier, the shadows darker. I could feel unseen eyes watching me, their gaze a constant weight on my shoulders. Marcus approached me during my shift, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by something colder. "You went back to the restricted section, didn't you?" I didn't answer. He sighed, running a hand over his face. "I warned you. Once you see what's in there, it sees you too. You've invited it in. What is it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Marcus hesitated before answering. "It's not something we understand. It's old, older than this warehouse, older than us. The crates are just containment. They're not meant to be opened. Then why keep them here?" I demanded. "Because there's nowhere else to put them," he replied grimly. "And now, you've made yourself part of it." That night, the whispers came again, stronger than ever. I wasn't asleep. I wasn't even lying down. I was sitting on my bunk, staring at the mark on my arm, when the world around me seemed to ripple. The room darkened, the walls stretching and twisting like melting wax. My breath came in short gasps as I realized I wasn't alone. The figure from the aisle was there, standing at the foot of my bed. Its form flickered like static, its glowing eyes fixed on me. "You've opened the door," it said. Its voice was a chorus, layered with countless other voices speaking in unison. "Now you must finish what you started." Before I could respond, the world shifted again. I wasn't in my bunk anymore. I was back in the forbidden room, surrounded by the glowing red crates. The whispers were deafening now, a tidal wave of sound that pressed against my mind, threatening to break me. The open crate at the center of the room pulsed with a crimson light, and from within, something began to emerge. It was shapeless at first, a mass of shifting shadows, but it soon took form. Dozens of arms stretched outward, their hands clawing at the air. Faces appeared and disappeared within the darkness, each one contorted in agony. "Free us," the entity demanded, its many voices blending into one. I stumbled backward, my legs threatening to give out. "I don't understand," I shouted. "What do you want from me?" "You've seen us," it replied. "Now you must release us." I woke up in my bunk, drenched in sweat. My head throbbed, my vision blurry. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream, but the mark on my arm burned like fire, its jagged edges glowing faintly in the darkness. Steve sat on the bunk across from me, his expression grim. "They won't stop," he said quietly. "Not until you do what they want." "What happens if I don't?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said it all. I was running out of time. The next morning, the air in the warehouse felt heavier than ever. The usual monotony of work was replaced with a palpable tension, as if everyone knew something was about to happen. Marcus's warnings echoed in my head, but I couldn't stop thinking about the forbidden room, the red crates, and the entity that had spoken to me. The mark on my arm burned constantly now, a searing reminder of the bargain I hadn't agreed to, but was bound by nonetheless. The whispers hadn't stopped, growing louder and more insistent each time I tried to ignore them. "You've seen us. You've touched the seal. Finish it." I couldn't focus on my tasks anymore. The warehouse seemed to shift and blur around me, its endless aisles becoming a labyrinth. My co-workers avoided me, their eyes darting away whenever I passed. Even Steve, who had always been my ally, stayed distant. "Don't go back there," he said that evening, his voice filled with quiet desperation. "Whatever they're asking you to do, don't listen. You think they'll leave you alone if you help them? They won't. They never do." The bells rang for the fourth time that night. I was in the workers' quarters, trying to rest, when the first chime echoed through the air. But this time it wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration, a pulse that seemed to shake the entire structure of the warehouse. The workers scrambled for the secured rooms, but I couldn't move. The whispers were louder than ever, drowning out the frantic shouts of my co-workers. "Come to us. Finish what you started." Before I realized what I was doing, I found myself walking toward the restricted section. My body moved on its own, compelled by a force I couldn't fight. The halls stretched endlessly before me, illuminated by a faint, pulsing red glow. The bells continued to ring, their haunting melody twisting and distorting as I drew closer to the forbidden room. When I reached the steel door, it was already open. The crimson light spilled out into the corridor, casting long, shifting shadows on the walls. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped inside. The room was alive. The walls pulsed with the same rhythmic glow as the crates, the hum vibrating deep in my bones. The air was thick and electric, making it hard to breathe. At the center of the room stood the open crate, its contents now fully revealed. The entity was no longer just a shifting shadow. It had form now, a towering mass of darkness and flame, its countless arms reaching out into the void. Faces flickered across its surface, each one frozen in an expression of terror. "You have come," it said, its voice a deafening chorus. "The seal must be broken." I stumbled back, my legs weak beneath me. "I don't understand," I said, my voice trembling. "What seal? What do you want from me?" The mark on my arm burned brighter, its jagged edges glowing like molten metal. "You carry the key," the entity replied. "Only you can set us free." I looked down at the mark, realization dawning on me. The entity hadn't chosen me by chance. I had touched the crate, opened the door, and now I was bound to it. Whatever this thing was, it was using me as its vessel. As I stood there, frozen with fear, Marcus appeared in the doorway. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice shaking. "If you break the seal, you'll unleash something we can't contain." The entity's arms stretched toward him, its shadowy tendrils curling around his feet. He didn't flinch, keeping his gaze locked on me. "Think about what you're doing," he continued. "This thing isn't just a prisoner. It's a parasite. If you free it, it'll consume everything." The whispers roared in my head, drowning out his words. The entity loomed closer, its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, burning with an otherworldly light. "You are ours," it said. "Complete the cycle. Free us, and we will grant you power beyond your understanding." I hesitated, the weight of the decision crushing me. If I broke the seal, I could end this torment, escape the whispers, and rid myself of the mark. But at what cost? Marcus's warning echoed in my mind. This wasn't about freedom. It was about control. The mark on my arm flared, the pain searing as the entity's power surged through me. My hand moved involuntarily, reaching for the crate. The lid pulsed with light, its edges glowing brighter with each passing second. "Stop!" Marcus shouted, rushing toward me. But the shadows were faster. They wrapped around him, pulling him to the ground. The entity's voice filled the room. "Finish it. In this, with every ounce of willpower I had left, I pulled my hand away. The pain was unbearable, but I refused to give in. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "You won't use me." The entity shrieked, its form writhing and twisting violently. The shadows recoiled, and the room trembled as if the warehouse itself was rejecting its presence. Marcus scrambled to his feet, grabbing my arm. "We have to go. Now!" The crate began to collapse in on itself, its glowing edges fracturing like glass. The entity's screams filled the air, a sound that I knew would haunt me forever. We barely made it out of the room before the door slammed shut behind us. The red glow vanished, leaving only darkness and silence in its wake. For the first time in days, the whispers were gone. Back in the workers' quarters, Marcus tended to my arm, which was now blistered and raw where the mark had been. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "But this isn't over. That thing, it's still here, and it's still waiting." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The warehouse felt different now, emptier somehow, but the weight of what had happened lingered in the air. I knew I wouldn't be staying much longer. This job had cost me too much already. A week later, I left the warehouse. The whispers didn't return, and the mark on my arm faded to a faint scar. But the memories stayed with me. The bells, the crates, the entity that had tried to consume me. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint echo of bells in the distance. And when I do, I know it's only a matter of time before someone else opens the door.